The history of Grand Theft Auto. Sometimes it's not a bug, it's a feature is a valid statement. It's why Minecraft's creeper enemy exists, and it's the only reason why Grand Theft Auto exists. This series began with a failed attempt to develop a standard top-down 16-bit driving game and ended up being one of the most lucrative video game series in history. Join us as we take a brief look at the history of Grand Theft Auto. The beginnings of GTA go all the way back to 1987 when a Scottish development house named DMA Design was founded. They concentrated on the most popular gaming machines of the time, which were home computers: the Commodore 64, Commodore Amiga, and the Atari ST. Their most famous game, Lemmings, was a puzzle game where you used certain skills to protect stylized lemmings. The game was popular enough to not only spawn several sequels, but it also impressed Nintendo enough that they wanted to work with DMA. In fact, Nintendo asked them to work on a launch title for the then unreleased Nintendo 64. However, Nintendo were unimpressed with the game that DMA Design had created for them, a third-person action shooter named Body Harvest. The game was delayed several times, and Nintendo had issues with the quite graphic content, which clashed with their family-friendly brand. Between this and the communication issues caused by the English-Japanese language divide, both companies soon decided to part ways. In 1995, DMA began development on a top-down action shooter driving game named Race and Chase. The idea behind the game was simple. What if instead of playing cops versus robbers, the players could play robbers versus cops? Instead of simply pulling over and ticketing criminals, as seen in a similar game named APB, players would need to avoid and even run from the police. Most of the team was inexperienced and progress was slow. The Race and Chase cops were supposed to follow you and maybe pull you over. But one of the developers made a mistake in the coding, and that's not what was happening. The AI-controlled cops were incredibly aggressive, even ramming into the player as if trying to kill them. DMA decided to capitalize on the coding error and make it a major part of the game. The game was finished and was released with a much more appropriate name, Grand Theft Auto. The playable areas in GTA contain 3 different maps, each loosely based on specific American locales: Liberty City, New York, Vice City, Miami, and San Andreas, California and Nevada. The GTA team had used a very clever marketing tactic, one that gaming companies still use to this day: whip politicians and other media personalities into a frenzy about the immoral activities available to children, and sit back and watch all the free advertising. The game was, of course, popular enough to spawn a sequel which used the same 2D art style. Although GTA 2 had added enough to justify its sequel status, DMA wasn't happy with it. They felt that GTA was groundbreaking and that GTA 2 was essentially more of the same. They decided that they needed to add more dimension to the series, literally, and would make the move to 3D. The first 3D game in the series, GTA 3, was so well received that it was the best-selling game of 2001. DMA Design was now owned by Rockstar Games and changed their name to Rockstar North. Rockstar North then released the 80s-themed Vice City, which was so popular that at the time, it was the fastest-selling game in history. Rockstar North's next GTA title was San Andreas, which told the story of a gang war from the point of view of a street gang. For the first time, the prevalence of the internet meant that those who weren't impacted directly by gaming had heard of the controversy surrounding GTA. We're talking, of course, about the hot coffee mod. If a player used the mod, then the protagonist CJ is able to have very pixelated sex with his girlfriend. If you don't use the mod, which obviously doesn't come with the game, it's inaccessible. Considering the low quality of graphics, it's amazing that this controversy still exists today, especially when the graphically realistic Witcher and Mass Effect series are given a free pass for the exact same thing. Then came GTA 4, which was received in a similar fashion as GTA 2, not particularly groundbreaking, but more of the same good times. Which brings us up to date with GTA 5, with a bigger map, 3 playable characters in the single-player campaign, a multiplayer component possibly more popular than the main game itself, and more controversy than ever. It's clear that Rockstar North still has the same pioneering spirit that they did back when they were still DMA Design. Which Grand Theft Auto is your favorite? Let us know in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and as always, geek out.